This production has been made possible by a generous funding from the Nasser Al-Said Charitable Foundation. Summer of 1976, Paris. Another book got published. It seemed to run the course of 1,000 others. But somehow, that one stood out to invite, unexpectedly, French readers in the hundreds of thousands to take their first steps into the almost entirely untrodden path of examining the Holy Scriptures under the unyielding light of modern science. The writer's startling discovery of the Quran's uniqueness in that realm, among other scripts, rings throughout his book. The Quran, he noticed, is a treasury of dictums that celebrate a belief solely based on the workings of the logical mind. The sheer Quranic method, he added, clearly invites empirical search to examine the science-related pronouncements laid out in the book. The reader is encouraged to think, reason, and seek scientific proofs in order to perceive certain statements in the Quran. In this way, he concluded, the authenticity of the Quranic text is absolutely established. This vision has eventually dominated the body of his work over the ensuing 25 years.
The famous hadith, Midaidul Ulama, Abdalu min Dami Shuhada. The scholar's ink is more precious than the martyr's blood. It comes as no surprise, therefore, to learn that religion and science have always been considered to be twin sisters by Islam, and that today, at a time when science has taken such great strides, they still continue to be associated, and furthermore, certain scientific data are used for the better understanding of the Quranic text.
But inevitable ramifications, all with collateral damage, had to happen.
Mais vous savez, M. Bucaille, comme beaucoup, c'est toujours la même chose. Les gens qui avancent des idées ne sont pas toujours compris. Et il en a souffert. Et moi, j'ai vu à la fin de sa vie qu'il en a souffert. Et je trouve qu'on a parfois été injuste envers lui.
أعرف جيدا أن موريس بوكاي قد جرح جروحا بليغة جدا في نفسه من التعامل معه.
ردة فعل المسلمين وترحابهم الكبير بكتاب الدكتور بوكاي لها كذلك علاقة بنقد الجمهور الفرنسي الكاثوليكي له.
Other French critics accused him of pushing concordances in to fit science with the Quran. A mainstream U.S. journal mocked his approach. One Turkish evolutionist fired his cannons. And one physicist from Pakistan hinted at his opportunism. Yet in spite of all of this, the book's phenomenal success, scored in the first 3 months, was meant to last over the following 3 decades, and counting. In merely a few months since June 1976, the French bookstores, registering big sales, kept asking for reprints. Subsequently, a new edition by 2 major publishing houses was released. Printers kept printing eventually at a rhythm of about 15 months to reach 24 editions by 2012. The book has unexpectedly become one of France's bestsellers. Ultimately, it soared worldwide, selling about 15 million copies in 50 editions in 12 foreign languages. One would wonder, what is in this book authored by one of France's leading gastroenterologists, Dr. Maurice Bucaille, which made it such an amazing phenomenon. Could it be attributed to the author's controversial criticism of incompatibilities in certain scriptural texts? Could it be his new revelations pertaining to the main protagonist in the Exodus drama who walked the ancient history some 34 centuries ago? Maybe it was just plain curiosity to see a serious researcher from the West pronouncing compatibilities between the Quran and modern science. His findings covered, to a big surprise, many a discipline ranging from astronomy, theoretical physics, geology, and forensic science to embryology, hydrology, botany, ornithology, and arthropods. Could it be his rather shocking objectivity, or is it attributed to his study being purely textual, a relatively not-so-common method in that field in the 70s of the 20th century? His pacifist approach to interfaith dialogue, perhaps? Or maybe it is his inquisitive approach to the unlikely mix of comparative religion and science. Or finally, could it be due to all of those factors combined? Today, more than 3 decades have elapsed since the publication of Bucaille's book. That brings about more than one question about Bucaille's methodology. Most persisting of those is, are his findings still inspiring? Have they withstood the test of time?
In 1935, I was 15 in a Christian college, and at that time, very important discoveries of necessarily human paintings in caverns in the south of Spain were made, and the specialists said very likely these paintings date back to about 15,000 years from now. In my book of religious teachings, it was written that the first appearance of man on earth dated back to about 40 centuries before Jesus. I said to him, what is the credible? The father said me, no, please don't confuse two things. You have the science and you have religion. If there is something which is not in accordance, it's the religion who said the truth. But I told him it is impossible. It's a well-established fact. The first appearance of man on earth cannot be evaluated to this time. It is impossible. We were educated. Religion said something, and science said another thing. I said to myself, something is going wrong.
The future Dr. Bucaille, born in Pont-l'Evêque in northern France in 1920, couldn't have known, or even guessed, on commencing his medical career around 1945, what would have been the residual of that inconvenient encounter with his Catholic teacher a decade earlier. The seemingly doomed showdown of science and religion, as crystallized by his instructor, had apparently set young Maurice on a path of discovery that would consume his entire life. Bucaille had set out to examine the Holy Scriptures themselves in the light of modern scientific knowledge. Bucaille recalls that during his employment years at the surgical clinic at the University of Paris in 1945, and even much later, how much he got involved in discussions about the viability of considering religion from a scientific perspective. The outcome of his encounters were not altogether unexpected to Bucaille. He wrote, "The materialist atheist scientist is unable to find in Judeo-Christian writings any language that is even vaguely similar to his own. They contain so many improbabilities, contradictions, and incompatibilities with modern scientific data that he refuses to take texts into consideration that the vast majority of theologians would like to see accepted as an inseparable whole." Those scientists are left today, Bucaille concludes, in a state of indifference and even disdain to religious matters they perceive originating from a body of myths.
In the Gospel of Luke, for example, you have between Adam and Jesus 76 generations are mentioned. That is not possible.
Bucaille had noted early on that when science and religion are discussed in the West, people are quite willing to confine themselves to Judaism and Christianity, but they hardly ever consider Islam.
Exegetes in Christian or Jewish communities think that the religious teachings were inspired to the author of the Bible, but considering the things which are not religious teachings, it's a fact that they wrote according to the ideas, superstition, myth of their time.
Alors, il l'a fait en tant que catholique, mais il s'est intéressé à l'islam. Et je ne sais pas du reste, dans quelles conditions, il ne me l'a pas dit. Et il a vu que dans le Coran, on insiste beaucoup, comme vous le savez, sur la création. La création qui est un signe de Dieu, ayat, les signes de Dieu dans l'univers, dans la création. Et je pense qu'il a bien vu que le Coran montrait que, au fond, la création était un don de Dieu et en même temps un appel de Dieu, que nous étions des créatures. Bon.
Indeed, there was no way then for an increasingly inquisitive Bucaille to understand, let alone appreciate, any feature of the Islamic culture. For what appeared to be a deeply rooted principle of misconception in his Western education about Islam had left on him a seemingly indelible impression for a long time. He wrote, "As I grew up, I was always taught that Muhammad was the author of the Quran. I remember seeing French translations bearing this information. I was invariably told that the author of the Quran simply compiled, in a slightly different form, stories of sacred history taken from the Bible. The author was said to have added or removed certain passages while setting forth the principles and rules of the religion he himself had founded. Most people in the West have been brought up on misconceptions concerning Islam and the Quran. For a large part of my life, I myself was one such person."
When I was at that time approximately in the 40s, received Muslim patients in Paris, and when I had the opportunity to speak with many of them concerning their religion. For me, originally, I thought that the Quran was the work of a man.
Throughout a good deal of the 60s, Bucaille happened to be treating Muslim patients in Paris. As he observed, they often referred to their book, the Quran, in a language that was totally foreign to him. Bucaille had finally come to the conclusion that in order to correctly satisfy the requisites of textual analysis of the Holy Scriptures, an educational decision had to be taken, albeit a little late.
I took the decision to learn Arabic in Paris. I was 50 exactly at that time.
And so the freshman Bucaille of the autumn class of 1970 had enrolled to study Arabic in Paris's prestigious National Institute of Oriental Languages.
The students are able to read the parts of the Quran which are not too much difficult, like most of the passages of Surah Al-Baqarah, for example, and at the same time, modern Arabic, like Al-Ayam min Taha Hussein, to compare the Arabic language of the Quran, Al-Fusha, with modern Arabic. That was an excellent thing for us to make a comparison and to feel that the language of the Quran was something without any comparison. When I finished my studies, thanks to God, I was in a position to read the Quran without any preconceived idea. At the beginning, without at all a belief in the fact that the Quran might be the Word of God.
In his book, Seeking Peace at Heart, of 2007, Professor Muhammad al-Talibi notices that the word mind is mentioned 49 times in the Quran. Science, meaning knowledge in general, is referred to 768 times. The word heart, meaning contemplation, comes in 172 times. Sight, meaning perceiving, is repeated 147 times, whereas the word remembrance, meaning to question and to consider attentively, is mentioned 268 times in the Quran.
1300 آية تتكلم عن العلم والعلماء. آيات التشريع التي تحكم الخلق في علاقاتهم بكل أنواعها عدها بعض المتخصصين ب535 آية.
Once he mastered Arabic, Bucaille could find in the Quran a trove of verses laden with calls to read, think, and to discover. He finally produced a short list of those directly related to empirical science.
I took notice of a lot of verses At the end, that was approximately between 150 and 200 verses, and gathered all these verses by discipline, by chapters, and I was extremely embarrassed. I said to myself, but it appears to me that it is impossible, considering what was the history of sciences, that a man would have written that almost 14 centuries ago.
Seeking scientific precision in his search, Bucaille reflects on what could be a scientifically acceptable or unacceptable passage in a certain scripture. He says, "What I intend to consider here are the incontrovertible facts, even if science can only provide incomplete data, but they will nevertheless be sufficiently well established to be quoted without fear of error." Perhaps the year 1976 stands out as probably the happiest and most prolific in Dr. Bucaille's career. As the year opened, he almost completed a breakthrough study of certain holy scriptural texts in relation to selected modern scientific fields, notably medical examination of the Egyptian mummies. In that area, Bucaille had applied his pioneering techniques to 2 specific pharaohs, and, in the interim, succeeded in scientifically identifying the pharaoh of the Exodus. On February 17th, Bucaille had to head to building number 16 at Rue Bonaparte. This is one of the oldest and most prestigious of science academies. One could clearly see the marks of the French Revolution on its facade. It is the French Academy of Medicine, which was founded in 1731. Bucaille had relayed the outcome of his team's research, conducted in Cairo, on the mummies of Ramses II and his successor, Mernptah. Bucaille's study had reached to cover other scientific disciplines of astronomy, geology, biology, botany, embryology, and theoretical physics. The outcome was considered by many as a major breakthrough in understanding the scientific signs of one of those holy scriptures, the Quran. In summer, his groundbreaking book, The Bible, the Quran, and Science, was published, crowning several years of research, including 5 of learning and reading Arabic. On September 26th, the mummy of Ramses II had arrived in Paris for treatment as a result of 2 years of persistent effort, personally initiated and followed through by Bucaille, which finally yielded an accord on top levels regarding the Ramses operation. On November 9th, Bucaille had to head back once more to the French Academy of Medicine. Only this time, he was there to deliver what was seen by many as an unusual rendering in the Academy's history, a lecture entitled Physiological and Embryological Data in the Quran.
In 1976, for the first time, in a lecture at the French Academy of Medicine in Paris, the word Quran appeared.
At the very opening of his lecture, Bucaille makes a unique reference to a 14th-century-old book containing a body of data totally unknown at that age, that is today in total conformity with our present status of knowledge. He added, that in itself stirs difficult problems. Being a religious book adds up supplementary questions to those problems. By examining the Quran, Bucaille bluntly stated that the physiologist and the embryologist would be surprised to find references to data in these disciplines, as well as in many others, including the creation of the universe and the aquatic source of life. To provide a sound base for his conclusions, Bucaille went on to probe the authenticity of the Quranic text by examining the history and the method of the book's preservation. Immediate registration of the revelation, as it was read by Prophet Muhammad over a period of 23 years until the book had been collected in its present book form by the third Caliph Othman bin Affan in the 7th century.
They were stupefied, and the question which was put was the following one: are you sure that the text of the Quran we have now is the text of the old times? I said them, go to our national library and you will be able to find all texts of the Quran of the 8th century of the Christian era. And you will be in a position to compare the text of that time and the text which is widespread now. This was not an objection, that was a question. This lecture has not have been forgotten.
Certainly not. The lecture was just the beginning. The phenomenal success of his book, the Bible, the Quran, and science, had unleashed unforeseen currents that not even Bucaille could have ever seen coming. And it seemed that Maurice Bucaille was the first Western scholar to write and publish in that field of comparative studies.
حسب علمي كان ذلك كذلك. حسب علمي والله أعلم.
ناقشت موريس بوكاي في كتبه الثلاث، وأنا قمت بمراجعة كتاب أصل الإنسان ترجمة من الفرنسية إلى العربية ومن الإنجليزية إلى العربية. شرفت بهذا العمل، وهذا أعطاني فرصة لمعرفة فكر موريس بوكاي أكثر.
To his surprise, the first French edition of his book had sold about 120,000 copies in the first 5 months.
The book appeared in 1976, and now it is a bestseller in France. The 13th edition in French was in preparation, and I have received last year the Golden Book Award. The publisher said me that last year they printed in French 140,000 copies, not including the pocketbook editions to be sent to foreign countries.
Unlike his early high expectations, Bucaille had to suffer, in spite of his repeated explanations, several injustices on two fronts, socially and from the Catholics.
Il n'a pas été bien reçu, parfois par certains chrétiens et parfois par certains musulmans. Il en a souffert certainement, parce qu'on lui a fait des reproches, on lui a fait des critiques qui vraiment l'ont peiné. Et moi j'ai vu sa peine, et je trouve qu'on ne doit pas être injuste, et qu'il y a eu contre lui des critiques injustes.
You do not think that it is a belief in Islam which would have been as the starting point of the thing. Not at all. It is through a scientific reasoning. I said the Quran cannot be the work of a man.
هذا الكتاب أثار غضبا شديدا من طرف الكنيسة، وكان الأب لأنه يعرف كتاب بوكاي من الرهبان الذين بقوا على صلاتهم الودية مع موريس.
دكتور بوكاي كان يحب الحوار بين العلم والدين. كان طبيب ورجل العلم، وكان مؤمن، وكان يعتقد بأن لابد من العلم والدين يمشوا معا.
هذا فضل موريس بوكاي، وكون هذه الشهادة تأتي من رجل غربي مسيحي كاثوليكي لا علاقة له بالمنطقة العربية، وتأتي بهذه القوة وهذا الوضوح وبهذه الموضوعية، هذا الذي حمدناه له.
It's a terrible thing when in your life, when you are almost 50, you have in your mind, you say, but maybe I am completely wrong about the Holy Scriptures, but it's terrible. Alors, I wanted absolutely to improve my knowledge concerning the Quran without any particular aim, not at all.
وقعت قطيعة لا شك فيها بين موريس بوكاي ووسطه.
Oui, certains chrétiens pensaient qu'il était musulman, qu'il défendait mieux l'islam que le christianisme. Et certains chrétiens ont cru, à tort à mon avis, qu'il avait écrit ce livre pour dire l'islam est vrai et le christianisme c'est faux. Ce n'était pas du tout son idée. Mais certains chrétiens lui ont reproché finalement de montrer trop bien les valeurs de l'islam, du Coran, en disant le Coran et la science s'appliquent très bien ensemble, tandis que la Bible et la science ne s'appliquent pas.
My problem is very simple, to say the truth.
In 1976, it didn't seem that the social pressure, subtle or explicit, that Bucaille has had to fall under, could bend the determined scholar as he declared his major conclusion: Quran and science are intertwined.
بوكاي انتصر على الكبر وانتصر على الضغط الاجتماعي.
So, years later, while still basking in the phenomenal success of his first book, the Bible, the Quran, and Science, Bucaille's life plan has shown a major shift. He decided to dedicate all his time to scientific research in relation to the scriptures.
Il est incontestable que dans l'ensemble, le monde islamique est une force considérable en raison des données actuelles de la politique industrielle, de l'énergie. C'est bien évident, n'est-ce pas? Il y a des changements dans le monde. À tel moment, c'est tel pays qui domine à tel point de vue, et à d'autres, c'est tel autre pays qui domine à un autre point de vue. Nous le savons bien pour le pétrole.
With an ever-increasing number of prints and translations of his book, the Bible, the Quran, and Science, it seemed that the school of exploring scientific signs in the Holy Scriptures is really gaining new momentum.
Il était donc médecin, il était compétent dans les sciences. Il n'avait pas une formation théologique vraiment très très profonde. Il n'avait pas fait d'études de théologie chrétienne et même musulmane. Il connaissait le Coran, mais il n'avait pas étudié les grands auteurs coraniques de musulmans. Il n'avait pas fait l'exégèse, par exemple. Et du côté chrétien aussi, il n'était pas très au courant des recherches de l'exégèse et de l'histoire du christianisme.
اتجاه حوار بين كتابين، القرآن من ناحية والكتاب المقدس من ناحية أخرى.
كان صيحة ودويا علميا.
كان غربيا، لم يكن شرقيا، يتهم بأنه يكتب بحكم العاطفة، شهادة مثقف غربي، ثقافة عالية.
وجد أن القرآن بكل الموضوعية والحيادية والتجرد ليست فيه ثمة شائبة فيما يتعلق بالعلم الحديث.
ردة فعل المسلمين وترحابهم الكبير بكتاب الدكتور بيكاي لها كذلك علاقة بنقد الجمهور الفرنسي الكاثوليكي له، ذلك أن الكثير منا المسلمون نرى فيه تفضيل وتقديم للقرآن على الإنجيل وعلى الكتاب المقدس، وكأنما نستعمله حجة عليهم.
Naturally, reactions to Bucaille's argument had to juxtapose, depending on one's perspective. As is always, those who sail high seas are destined to be struck by strong winds of criticism, not all necessarily favorable, fair, or decent.
Je trouvais en lui beaucoup de volonté, de spiritualité, de fidélité, de dialogue, de volonté, de paix, et je trouve que cela mérite le respect. C'est toujours la même chose, les gens qui avancent des idées ne sont pas toujours compris.
As it happened, Bucaille's book had stirred an already heated debate between two old adversaries, the evolutionist and the creationist. One of the evolutionist arguments were trumpeted loud and clear in an article entitled Quran, Science, Scientific Miracles from the 7th Century, published by Turkish physicist and philosopher Taner Edis. In an all-sarcastic tone, the writer defends his case against the apologetics who hunt for scientific miracles in the Quran. On top of the list, of course, comes Maurice Bucaille, who was introduced by Edis as a French surgeon popular in Islamic circles, as Western scientists acknowledging that the Quran did not contain a single statement that was assailable from a modern scientific point of view. Next to Bucaille on the creationist list is Professor Keith Moore, the Canadian apologetic scientist quoted by Edis as stating, "Statements referring to human reproduction and development are scattered throughout the Quran. It is only recently that the scientific meaning of some of these verses has been appreciated fully." Edis ends up judging Moore by this verdict. This embryological apologetic is very popular, and I doubt this statement has originated with Moore.
Muhammad could not have known these facts about human development in the 7th century because most of them were not discovered until the 20th century. Muslims and others are justified in concluding that these facts could only have been revealed to Muhammad by the one who knows all about us, not only about how we developed, but how we live and function.
As a medical doctor, particularly attracted to natural sciences and physiology, I must confess that in 1972, when I read the Quran in the original text for the first time, these data concerning man were those which impressed me most. And in view of the state of knowledge in Prophet Muhammad's day, it is inconceivable that many of the statements in the Quran which are connected with science could have been the work of any man. It is therefore perfectly legitimate not only to regard the Quran as the expression of revelation, but also to award it a very special place on account of the guarantee of authenticity it provides and the presence in it of reflection which, when studied today, appear as a challenge to human explanation.
في آخر مقابلة لي معه كان في إندونيسيا عندما عقدنا المؤتمر العالمي الخامس للإعجاز العلمي في القرآن والسنة. جلست أتحدث إليه فقال لي: أصدقك أني عشت أياماً لم أعش كمثلها إطلاقاً عندما كنت أتأمل في هذه الحقائق التي تهزني.
I suppose that my explanations are enough for everybody who is objective and sincere to say the Quran cannot be the work of a man.
An estimated 2 to 3 million copies of the French version and around 10 to 15 million copies in other languages were sold.
كلامه عن أصل الماء المختزن في صخور القشرة الأرضية والله لم يسبقه إليه أحد حقيقة.
The first French edition of his book, What is the Origin of Man? The Answers of Science and the Holy Scriptures, was published in 1981. Then 4 editions of it were published in English until 1989, followed by 3 translations into Arabic, Turkish, and Indonesian. Dr. Bucaille had co-authored with Professor Muhammad al-Talibi in 1989 a book of Reflections on the Quran. In 1990, the English edition of Bucaille's book, Mummies of the Pharaohs, Modern Medical Investigations, was published in New York.
أنا معتقد بأن دكتور بوكاي كان أولاً مؤمن بالله، مؤمن مسيحي كاثوليكي، وهو كان عنده الإيمان وهو مخلص في هذا الإيمان.
لقد مات مسلما.
رجل نزيه، وهذا ما حببني فيه، وهذا ما يجعلني عندما أذكر اسمه أقول دائما وأبدا رحمه الله. ومن قال أن الله المطلع على السرائر لا يعلم أن عبده موريس بوكاي كان رجلا فاضلا، غير أنه أقول بكل صراحة موريس بوكاي لم يعلن أبدا إسلامه. في حديثه معي يبدو أنه لا خلاف بيننا، والله أعلم بالسرائر.
موريس بوكاي عليه رحمة الله أنا لا أعلم قد أسلم ومات على الإسلام أم لا، ولكن لقائي به لعدة مرات وكان آخرها في مؤتمر بندونغ، الرجل قال عن الإسلام كلاما من أروع ومن أجمل ما قيل عن هذا الدين.
دكتور بوكاي كان يحب الإسلام. كان مسيو بيرك، جاك بيرك، وكيفي أنا دكتور بوكاي وجاك بيرك وأنا كذلك، نحن كلنا مسيحيون كاثوليكيون ونحب الإسلام.
Suppose I was born in a Muslim family. Suppose my name would be Mohammed Bucaille instead of Maurice Bucaille. Be sure that I would have been very proud of that. Do you imagine that I would have made such a work?
The Bible, the Quran, and Science was awarded in 1986 the French Golden Book Award. The French Academy awarded Dr. Maurice Bucaille the History Award in 1988 in appreciation of his book, Mummies of the Pharaohs, Modern Medical Investigations, published in 1987. In 1991, the French National Academy of Medicine awarded Dr. Maurice Bucaille a prize in appreciation of his medical and scientific contributions. The first French edition of Bucaille's last book, Moses and Pharaoh, Hebrews in Egypt, has appeared in 1995.
دكتور بوكاي كان حبيبي وصديقي، وشكرا لدكتور بوكاي لكل ما عمل في حياته.
أؤكد طبعا أنه كان مسلم، وما فقط كان مسلم لكن كان غيور، كان متفخر بالإسلام، كان غيور على دين، لكن ما كان يتظاهر بهكذا لأنه مهما كان تربى في الأسلوب البرجوازية الفرنسية، فكان مثلا هذه المسألة ما يظهرها كممكن مثلي.
والله يرحمه.
You will see, since you are young in the future, maybe after several decades, when I shall be a dead man, you will note that many people among the scientists are accepting to take into account this compatibility between religions and science. What I think is the truth, nothing more. For the Bible, always for the Quran. But for the Quran, I see that I could not find something in contradiction with science.
In 1998, the year the author passed away, Maurice Bucaille's book, The Bible, the Quran, and Science, won the Book of the Month award, given to the bestseller books in France. Dr. Bucaille's publishers denied the producers information needed to document his publications. At the end of a series of persisting calls, an employee volunteered to send an email. She pointed out that the Bible, the Quran, and Science was regularly reprinted in order to keep the bookshops provided. There were, she added, many editions, much more than 10, but couldn't say exactly because her database didn't have access to this information. The employee ended her message by saying that the editor who did know Maurice Bucaille is Mr. Devay, but he died 2 years ago. Dr. Maurice Bucaille's family refused to provide assistance in this production. Instead, Madame Bucaille found it complimentary enough to mail the producers a brief note containing some already published information about his books and awards. She was kind enough to include a photo of her late husband. All biographical and career information about Dr. Bucaille has been obtained through independent sources.